The aircraft that was supposed to define American air power for the next 50 years may already be obsolete. Not because it failed, not because the technology fell short, but because something else, something that has never appeared on a Pentagon press release, something that has never been shown at an air show, something that has never been officially acknowledged by a single uniformed general in a public briefing, is already flying, and it is already doing things the B-21 Raider cannot do. This is the story of a program so classified that even asking about it in the wrong room can end a career. It is a story about what happens when the most advanced Air Force in human history decides that the future cannot wait for the public to catch up. It is a story about stealth, about black budgets, about the gap between what America shows the world and what America is actually capable of. And if you have ever looked up at the sky and wondered what you are not seeing, subscribe right now, because this is exactly the kind of story you are going to want to follow. Before we go any further, let us be absolutely clear about one thing. The B-21 Raider is real. It is extraordinary. It represents decades of engineering, billions of dollars, and some of the most talented aerospace minds in the country. Northrop Grumman built something genuinely remarkable when that aircraft rolled out of the hangar in Palmdale, California on December 2nd, 2022. The people who worked on that program deserve every ounce of credit they have received. What we are talking about today is not a dismissal of the B-21. It is something far more interesting. It is the question of what comes after the B-21, and whether that successor is not coming, but is already here. To understand why this matters, you have to understand how the United States Air Force has operated in the shadows for the last 70 years. Because the history of American stealth aviation is not a history of announcements. It is a history of revelations, things that existed for years, sometimes decades, before the public ever heard about them, things that flew over populated areas, that were tracked by amateur astronomers, that generated thousands of reported sightings, all while the government either said nothing or actively denied their existence. And then one day, sometimes quietly, sometimes in a dramatic press conference, the curtain lifted just enough for the world to see a sliver of what had been there all along. The United States Air Force has a long and documented history of operating programs so secret that they exist in an entirely separate budgetary universe. These are called Special Access Programs, or SAPs. Inside that world, there are further subdivisions. Unacknowledged Special Access Programs, sometimes called black programs, are efforts so sensitive that their very existence is classified. Not just the technical details, not just the capabilities, but the fact that the program exists at all is a secret. Acknowledging it, even to a member of Congress who does not have the specific clearance, is a federal crime. This is not conspiracy theory. This is how the United States government has operated for generations. The U-2 spy plane was one of them. The SR-71 Blackbird was one of them. The F-117 Nighthawk was one of them. The B-2 Spirit began its life in deeply classified territory before eventually becoming public knowledge. The pattern is consistent, and it is deliberate. America builds its most dangerous tools in secret, operates them in secret, and only reveals them when the strategic advantage of revealing them outweighs the strategic advantage of secrecy. So when defense analysts, retired senior officers, aerospace engineers with decades of clearance-adjacent careers, and budget watchers who spend their lives reading between the lines of the Pentagon's financial disclosures all start pointing to the same anomaly, it is worth paying very close attention. And for the last several years, all of those people have been pointing at a number, a very large, very unusual number buried inside the classified portions of the Air Force's budget, a number that does not match the B-21 program, a number that does not match any known aircraft development effort, a number that is growing, year after year, in the portion of the defense budget that the public is never allowed to see in full detail. That number is the fingerprint of something being built, something large, something expensive. Something that the United States Air Force considers more important than anything it has ever put on a runway. Let us start at the beginning, because to understand where we might be going, you have to understand exactly how we got here. The story of American stealth starts not with an American idea, but with a Soviet one. In the early 1960s, a Soviet physicist named Pyotr Ufimtsev published a paper on the mathematical relationship between an object's shape and its radar signature. The paper was so theoretical, so abstract, that Soviet military authorities decided it was of no practical military value and allowed it to be published openly. It sat largely unnoticed for years. Then, in the early 1970s, a mathematician at Lockheed named Dennis Overholser read it and recognized immediately that Ufimtsev had handed the world a blueprint for building aircraft that radar could barely see. Lockheed's Advanced Development Division, the legendary Skunk Works, took that mathematical foundation and began building the future. The result was a program called Have Blue, the technology demonstrator that would eventually become the F-117 Nighthawk. The F-117 flew for the first time in 1977. It was not publicly acknowledged until 1988. For 11 years, it flew operational missions, was maintained by hundreds of people, and was kept completely invisible to the American public and to the world. That is what the United States Air Force is capable of when it wants to keep a secret. The B-2 Spirit followed a similar path. Development began in the late 1970s, under a program called Senior Ice. The aircraft flew for the first time in 1989. But the program had been burning through classified dollars, shaping the future of strategic bombing, for over a decade before anyone outside a very small circle of cleared individuals knew it existed. And the B-2 was not just a stealth aircraft, it was a revolution, a flying wing design that produced a radar cross-section roughly equivalent to a large bird, combined with the ability to carry nuclear and conventional weapons over intercontinental distances without being detected. It was the most capable strategic bomber ever built, and it had been quietly in development since before many of the pilots who now fly it were born. Now fast forward to the 21st century. The B-2 is aging. The B-52, the ancient and magnificent workhorse of American strategic bombing, is still flying and will continue to fly for decades, but it is not a stealth platform. The Air Force needs a next-generation stealth bomber, something that can penetrate the increasingly sophisticated air defense systems being fielded by China and Russia. Systems with longer-range sensors, more advanced processing, networked radar architectures that are fundamentally different from the threat environment the B-2 was designed to defeat. The answer, at least officially, is the B-21 Raider. Northrop Grumman's next-generation stealth bomber, designed with all of those modern threats in mind, built using manufacturing and materials technology that was not available when the B-2 was created, and optimized for the specific electromagnetic environment of the 21st century battlefield. The B-21 is everything the Air Force asked for publicly, and that word, publicly, is the one that should make you pause. Because here is what the history of American black aviation tells us. When the United States Air Force publicly acknowledges a requirement, and publicly funds a program, and publicly awards a contract, and publicly rolls out an aircraft, it is almost never showing you its most advanced capability. It is showing you what it is comfortable letting adversaries know about. It is showing you the platform that will be in the news, that will be discussed in open-source defense publications, that will be the subject of congressional testimony and budget justifications written in unclassified language. The public program serves a purpose. It justifies the existence of an industrial base. It keeps engineers trained and production lines warm. It provides deterrence value by letting potential adversaries know that America is developing something new. But the most dangerous capability, the thing that makes defense planners in Beijing and Moscow genuinely lose sleep, that is almost never the thing being discussed on CNN. The question that serious defense analysts have been wrestling with for the last several years is deceptively simple. Is the B-21 the edge of American capability in stealth bombing, or is it the public face of a program that has a classified shadow? And if there is a classified shadow, what does it look like? What can it do that the B-21 cannot? And how far along is it? To answer those questions, you have to follow the money. Because money, even in a classified budget, leaves traces. The United States defense budget is divided into several categories: research, development, testing and evaluation, procurement, operations and maintenance, and within each of those categories, there are classified line items, amounts that are real, that are appropriated by Congress, that are spent by real programs on real hardware, but whose details are hidden from the public. Every year, independent analysts at organizations like the Stimson Center, the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, and various academic institutions that track defense spending do something painstaking and fascinating. They compare the total classified budget to everything they can identify within it, and when the numbers do not add up, when there is more money flowing into the classified space than can be explained by all the known classified programs combined, that gap is called the black budget delta. And for the last decade, that delta has been growing in the Air Force's aviation-related accounts, in a way that is very difficult to explain using only what is publicly known. The B-21 program is expensive. Northrop Grumman won a contract that was initially estimated at around $21 billion for the engineering, development, and initial production of the aircraft. The Air Force has stated it wants at least 100 of them, with a unit cost target of around $550 million per aircraft in then-year dollars. That is a serious program. That is real money. But the classified aviation accounts being watched by outside analysts contain dollars that do not appear to be attached to the B-21 at all. They are in different line items. They are growing at different rates. They are being spent by different organizations within the Air Force research and development structure. Something else is being funded, and based on the scale of the funding, it is not a small something. Before we go deeper into what that something might be, please take a second to subscribe if you have not already. The vast majority of people watching right now are not subscribed. It takes less than 3 seconds, and it means you will never miss a story like this one. Now let us talk about what the defense community has been quietly saying for years about what might exist beyond the B-21. The first thread worth pulling is the concept of penetrating strike. When defense strategists talk about the future threat environment, particularly the environment created by China's advanced air defense systems and its anti-access area denial strategy, they are describing something genuinely new. China has invested massively in long-range radar systems, surface-to-air missiles, integrated air defense networks that share data across multiple sensors and multiple platforms simultaneously, and electronic warfare capabilities designed specifically to detect and engage low-observable aircraft. The B-2 was designed in an era when these threats did not exist in their current form. The B-21 was designed with them in mind, but it was designed to survive in them. There are people within the United States Air Force and within the defense planning community who argue that surviving in a threat environment is not enough. That what is needed is an aircraft that the threat environment cannot even detect is there. That is a fundamentally different design goal. Surviving detection is not the same as defeating detection entirely. And achieving genuine, reliable, near-total radar invisibility against a networked, multi-spectrum, artificial intelligence-assisted air defense system requires capabilities that go well beyond what any publicly acknowledged platform has demonstrated. The second thread is speed. The B-2 flies at high subsonic speeds. The B-21 is expected to do the same. In the strategic bombing world, that has traditionally been acceptable because the premise of stealth is that speed is less important when the enemy cannot see you coming. But modern air defense systems are increasingly capable of cueing from multiple sources, including space-based sensors, over-the-horizon radar systems, and passive detection methods that do not rely on traditional radio frequency emissions at all. Against a sufficiently advanced layered defense, even a perfectly stealthy aircraft has a finite window of vulnerability during ingress and egress. Speed compresses that window dramatically. An aircraft that can penetrate enemy airspace at Mach 3, Mach 4 or beyond, while simultaneously maintaining low observable characteristics, creates a problem for air defense systems that may be effectively unsolvable with current technology. You cannot intercept what you cannot see, and you cannot intercept what is gone before your intercept missiles can reach their target. The combination of extreme speed and extreme stealth is not a new idea. The SR-71 Blackbird relied on speed as its primary defense, flying so fast that it could simply outrun the missiles fired at it. Over its career, more than 4,000 missiles were fired at SR-71s. None of them connected. Now imagine an aircraft that combines the Blackbird's speed philosophy with the B-2's stealth philosophy, built using 21st century materials, manufacturing, propulsion, and electronic warfare technology. That is not a hypothetical. That is a design goal that the Air Force and the Defense Industrial Base have had the technical capability to seriously pursue for at least the last 15 years. The third thread is what the Air Force itself has inadvertently said. Senior Air Force leaders, when discussing the B-21 program, have made statements that are interesting in their careful precision. When asked whether the B-21 represents the Air Force's most advanced aviation capability, the answers have consistently been variations of the phrase, "The B-21 is the most capable bomber the Air Force has ever publicly fielded." That qualifier, publicly, appears with enough consistency that it reads less like bureaucratic language and more like a very careful legal distinction. When General Timothy Ray, who served as commander of Air Force Global Strike Command, was asked about future bomber capabilities, he said that the Air Force was working on capabilities he could not discuss in an open hearing. That is a standard response. What is less standard is the frequency and the specificity with which senior leaders have declined to characterize the B-21 as the absolute ceiling of American bomber capability. In a world where the Air Force is spending billions of dollars on the B-21 and wants Congress to fund it fully, you might expect its champions to describe it in the most superlative terms possible. Instead, what you consistently hear is careful, bounded language that leaves room, quite deliberately, for something else to exist. The fourth thread is the industrial base itself. Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works division, the organization that built the U-2, the SR-71, and the F-117, has maintained a workforce and a facility structure that is significantly larger than what would be required to support only its publicly acknowledged programs. The same is true, to varying degrees, of Northrop Grumman's classified advanced development facilities. These are not organizations that maintain excess capacity for no reason. They are lean, highly classified, extraordinarily expensive organizations that justify their existence through output. What are they building? What have they been building? The public does not know. But the money flowing into those facilities, traceable in broad strokes through budget documents, is real, and it is substantial. Now let us talk about what is actually known, in open source terms, about the potential shape of what might exist beyond the B-21. Because while the program itself is classified, the technological building blocks that would make it possible have been discussed, funded, and in some cases demonstrated in open literature. Adaptive cycle engine technology represents perhaps the most important propulsion development in American aerospace history since the turbojet. Traditional jet engines are designed to be efficient within a relatively narrow range of operating conditions. You can optimize an engine for high subsonic cruise efficiency or for supersonic performance, but you are trading one against the other. Adaptive cycle engines use variable geometry components and a third airstream to essentially reconfigure themselves during flight, achieving high efficiency at subsonic cruise speeds and high performance at supersonic speeds within the same engine. The Air Force Research Laboratory has funded adaptive engine technology development for years through a program called the Adaptive Engine Technology Development Program, which eventually fed into the Adaptive Engine Transition Program. The companies involved, primarily GE Aviation and Pratt & Whitney, have demonstrated adaptive cycle engines that show substantial improvements in fuel efficiency and thrust range compared to conventional designs. The Air Force has publicly discussed using this technology for the next generation of fighter aircraft, but the same fundamental technology that makes an adaptive cycle engine transformative for a fighter aircraft makes it potentially revolutionary for a long-range penetrating strike platform. An aircraft that can cruise efficiently at high altitude and high subsonic speed for intercontinental range, then accelerate through the sound barrier and sustain high supersonic speeds over defended territory, using a single engine type that performs both missions well, is no longer a theoretical construct. The engines to power such an aircraft have been demonstrated. They exist. Materials science is the other side of the equation. Stealth is not just about shape. Shape is critically important. The famous faceted panels of the F-117 and the smooth curves of the B-2 both represent design choices driven by the mathematics of radar wave reflection. But modern stealth also relies heavily on radar-absorbing materials, coatings, and structures that absorb rather than reflect radar energy, converting it to heat or dissipating it through other mechanisms. The B-2 uses radar-absorbing materials that were state-of-the-art in the 1980s. The B-21 uses updated versions of similar concepts. But materials science has advanced dramatically since even the B-21's design was finalized. Metamaterials, engineered structures that exhibit electromagnetic properties not found in naturally occurring materials, have been demonstrated in laboratory settings to produce radar absorption characteristics that far exceed conventional absorber technology. Plasma stealth, the use of ionized gas fields around an aircraft to absorb radar energy, has been studied by multiple countries including Russia and has been the subject of serious academic research for decades. Carbon nanotube-based composites offer structural strength and weight characteristics that were simply not achievable when existing stealth platforms were designed. The point is not that any one of these technologies is definitively being used in a classified program. The point is that the raw material of extraordinary stealth capability, far beyond what the B-21 represents, has been available to well-funded, highly classified engineering teams for long enough that the idea of them having turned it into a flying platform is not speculative. It is, based on the historical pattern of American black aviation, almost expected. Let us now talk specifically about what the defense community refers to as the next-generation strategic bomber, or variously as the Penetrating Strike Platform, the PSP. These terms appear in enough credible defense publications, in enough testimony from people who have held relevant clearances, and in enough budget documents with enough context to be taken seriously as references to a real program rather than wishful thinking. The broad contours of what this platform is believed to represent, based on open-source aggregation of technical commentary, budget analysis, and indirect official statements, describe an aircraft that operates at the intersection of three capabilities that no single existing platform combines. Those capabilities are extreme low observability against full-spectrum detection systems, including radar, infrared, acoustic, and electromagnetic signatures, hypersonic or high supersonic dash capability that can compress the exposure window over defended airspace, an intercontinental range without tanker support or with dramatically reduced tanker dependency compared to existing platforms. If that sounds like an impossible combination, it is worth remembering that for decades, people said the same thing about the combination of long range, heavy payload, and low observability that the B-2 eventually delivered. The laws of physics do not prohibit the combination being described. The engineering challenges are extraordinary, but extraordinary engineering challenges are exactly what black aviation programs exist to solve, away from the pressure of public scrutiny and adversary observation. The name that appears most frequently in serious open-source discussions of this topic is not a proper program name. It is a description. Some analysts refer to it as the B-21's classified shadow. Others use the term penetrating strike platform demonstrator to describe what they believe may have already been flying in operational testing. The distinction between a demonstrator that validates the technology and an operational platform that is being quietly produced is an important one, and the honest answer is that the open-source record does not definitively resolve it. What it does suggest, based on the funding patterns and the timeline of relevant technology maturation, is that whatever exists in this space has been flying long enough to have moved beyond the demonstrator phase. The most conservative reading of the available evidence suggests a technology demonstrator that has been flying for somewhere between 5 and 10 years. The less conservative reading suggests something closer to an operational capability that is being quietly accumulated while the B-21 occupies the public's attention and the public budget justification process. Why would the Air Force do this? Why maintain the public B-21 program if a more capable platform already exists or is in advanced development? The answer has multiple layers, and each layer makes complete sense when you understand how American defense procurement and strategy actually work. The first layer is deterrence management. The United States does not want potential adversaries to know exactly how capable its most advanced platforms are. If the Air Force publicly acknowledged the existence of a platform that combined extreme stealth with hypersonic speed and intercontinental range, adversaries would immediately begin redirecting enormous resources toward detecting and defeating that specific combination of capabilities. By maintaining uncertainty, by letting potential adversaries focus on defeating the B-21 while something significantly more capable quietly accumulates in the background, the Air Force preserves a strategic surprise capability that could be decisive in a conflict. The second layer is industrial base management. The B-21 program keeps Northrop Grumman's bomber production capability alive and active. It keeps supply chains warm, keeps engineers trained, keeps production facilities running. If and when the classified platform either becomes public or requires significant production scaling, the industrial infrastructure to support it is already in place and already proven. The third layer is political reality. Convincing Congress to fund a program whose capabilities cannot be described in open testimony, whose existence must be protected at every stage of the budget process, is genuinely difficult. The B-21 provides a publicly defensible anchor for Air Force strategic aviation funding. It is real, it is impressive, and it justifies the budgetary attention of elected officials who cannot be read into the details of what else might be flying. The fourth layer is the oldest reason in the book. Some secrets are worth keeping indefinitely. The American public has a legitimate interest in knowing how its money is being spent, but the American military has an equally legitimate interest in not advertising its most dangerous capabilities to people who wish the country harm. These two interests are in genuine tension. The way the United States government has traditionally resolved that tension in the domain of aviation is by keeping the most dangerous things classified until either the technology is sufficiently mature that revealing it no longer compromises it, or until the strategic environment changes enough that the deterrence value of revelation outweighs the tactical value of secrecy. There is a moment in every black program's history when it becomes, in the language of the intelligence community, no longer sensitive, when adversaries have either detected it independently or when the next generation of capability has advanced far enough that the current generation can be revealed without meaningful compromise. The F-117 was revealed in 1988, 12 years after its first flight, and only after a significantly more advanced platform, the B-2, was already in development. The B-2 itself became progressively less classified as the 21st century advanced, and as its technological foundation became increasingly well understood by potential adversaries. The pattern suggests that when the Air Force eventually reveals the next thing, whatever the classified platform beyond the B-21 turns out to be, it will do so because what comes after that next thing is already flying. Let us talk about something that the aviation community noticed in the years immediately following the B-21's public reveal. The rollout ceremony in December 2022 was carefully choreographed. The aircraft was displayed in a way that revealed remarkably little about its specific design features. The lighting was controlled, the angles were limited, and the Air Force declined to provide the kind of detailed technical briefing that typically accompanies major aviation milestones. Defense analysts who attended the event noted that they learned almost nothing about the aircraft's propulsion system, its sensors, its electronic warfare suite, or its specific structural design beyond the broad flying wing configuration. That level of information control at a public event is itself informative. The Air Force was comfortable showing the world that the B-21 existed. It was not comfortable showing the world what the B-21 actually was. And when you control information that carefully at a public unveiling, you are almost certainly controlling it even more carefully about something that has not been unveiled at all. The other thing that the aviation community noticed was something that did not happen at the rollout. Not a single current program executive, not a single serving general officer, described the B-21 as the most capable aircraft the United States had ever built. They described it as the most capable aircraft the United States had ever publicly built. They described it as the most important publicly acknowledged aviation program in a generation. They used superlatives freely, but only within carefully constructed boundaries that always left room for something beyond them. People who spend their careers in classified programs learn to speak in precisely that way. They learn to say everything they are authorized to say and nothing they are not. And what they said about the B-21, taken in its full context, was that it is the most impressive thing they are allowed to talk about. Now let us get specific about the technical indicators that point most directly toward an advanced classified platform that goes beyond B-21 capabilities. The first indicator is the behavior of the Air Force's classified research and development accounts in the years before and after the B-21 contract award. When Northrop Grumman won the Long-Range Strike Bomber contract in 2015, it was the culmination of a competitive process that also included a Boeing and Lockheed Martin team. That competition was real, it was expensive, and its conclusion was a legitimate milestone. But in the classified research and development accounts, something interesting happened in the years that followed. Rather than seeing a consolidation of classified aviation funding around the B-21 program, analysts noted the persistence, and in some accounts the growth, of classified aviation line items that were not traceable to B-21 production or development activities. Programs were continuing to be funded that were separate from the B-21 and that were, based on their placement within the budget structure, related to advanced aviation development rather than to operational support or sustainment of existing platforms. That pattern is consistent with the existence of a parallel development effort. The second indicator is the behavior of the Air Force's test infrastructure. Edwards Air Force Base in California and Eglin Air Force Base in Florida are the primary test ranges for Air Force aircraft. Their activity levels, their airspace reservations, their instrumentation deployments all create a kind of shadow record of what is being tested, even when the specific aircraft being tested are classified. Aviation enthusiasts and independent analysts have noted patterns of restricted airspace activity over the Nevada Test and Training Range, the vast military airspace that encompasses Area 51 and the surrounding desert, that are not consistent with any publicly known test program. The Nevada Test and Training Range is the traditional home of black aviation testing, the place where the U-2 flew its first test flights, where the Have Blue demonstrator was validated, where the F-117 was operationally proved before its existence was acknowledged. When that range shows unusual activity patterns, serious analysts take note. The third indicator is human intelligence in the most literal sense. People who live near and work at classified aviation facilities talk, not about classified information, but about observable things. Aircraft sounds, not from any identifiable engine signature. Light patterns at night consistent with flight operations of unknown aircraft. Transportation patterns suggesting the movement of large structures under security protocols beyond what known programs would require. The communities around Palmdale, California, around Edwards Air Force Base, around Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico, and around the Nevada Test and Training Range have produced a steady, low-level background of reports that are individually easy to dismiss, but collectively paint a picture of sustained aviation activity that cannot be entirely accounted for by known programs. Aviation enthusiasts who specialize in tracking flight activity at classified facilities have documented acoustic signatures and visual phenomena that they cannot identify as any publicly acknowledged aircraft. Some of these reports are undoubtedly misidentifications. Some are genuine observations of classified activity. The challenge, as always, is that the classification system makes it impossible to determine which is which from the outside. But the volume and the consistency of the reports, particularly those related to acoustic signatures suggesting large aircraft at high altitude operating at unusual speeds, is worth taking seriously. The fourth indicator is what has happened to the careers of specific individuals. The United States military has a handful of officers at any given time who are read into the most sensitive aviation programs. Their career trajectories, their assignment histories, their areas of focus, all create traceable patterns even when the programs themselves are invisible. Defense analysts who track personnel movements within the Air Force have noted that a cohort of officers with backgrounds in strategic aviation, advanced propulsion, and low observable technology have followed career paths that do not align with any publicly known program. They have spent time at organizations whose public mission statements do not fully explain their staffing levels or their activity patterns. They have been promoted on timelines that suggest significant program responsibility, the kind of responsibility that comes from managing major acquisition efforts without any publicly acknowledged program to explain those promotions. You become a general because you have done something significant. If you become a general in the world of classified aviation and your publicly acknowledged activities do not fully explain your advancement, something classified does. Let us now address the question that follows naturally from everything we have discussed. If a more capable platform than the B-21 is already flying, what does it mean for American strategic deterrence? What does it mean for the balance of military power? And what does it mean for the men and women who serve in strategic aviation? The answer to the first question is straightforward and encouraging from an American security perspective. It means that whatever potential adversaries have designed their air defenses to detect and defeat, they may be preparing for the wrong threat. China has invested enormously in systems specifically designed to detect fifth-generation stealth aircraft, to detect the electromagnetic signature of active electronically scanned array radars, to detect the infrared signature of modern turbofan engines at high altitude. If the platform that actually arrives over a defended target looks, sounds, and appears electromagnetically different from anything those defenses were optimized to engage, the investment becomes worthless at the moment it matters most. Strategic surprise, the ability to present an adversary with a problem they have never encountered and have not prepared for, is arguably the most valuable capability in military aviation. If the United States has quietly developed and deployed a platform that achieves it, that represents a qualitative military advantage of extraordinary magnitude. The answer to the second question about the balance of military power is more complex. Technological advantages in military aviation are real, but not permanent. Russia and China are both investing heavily in their own advanced aviation capabilities, their own stealth programs, their own hypersonic research. The United States has historically maintained a significant lead in these areas, but the margin is not infinite, and the pace of adversary development has accelerated substantially in the last 15 years. What the existence of a classified platform beyond the B-21 would represent is not a permanent guarantee of American air superiority. It would represent a moment of advantage, a window of capability that exists right now, that must be maintained and extended through continued investment, continued research, and continued willingness to do the hard work of staying ahead. American aerospace dominance is not a birthright. It is earned expensively and continuously by engineers and pilots and program managers who dedicate their careers to it. The answer to the third question about the men and women in strategic aviation is perhaps the most human of the three. If a classified platform beyond the B-21 exists and is flying, then somewhere in the American military there are aircrew who have trained on it, who have flown it, who have taken it to altitudes and speeds and distances that no publicly acknowledged aircraft can match. They live and work in a world of extraordinary classification, where they cannot discuss their work with family members, where their professional achievements will never appear in the public record, where the extraordinary things they do will remain invisible to the country they protect. This is not unique to aviation. It describes the reality of every person who serves in the classified world. But it carries a particular weight in aviation, where the physical experience of flight, the sensation of climbing through clouds, of seeing the curve of the Earth from extreme altitude, of pushing an aircraft to its absolute limits, is something so profound that not being able to share it represents a genuine sacrifice. The men and women who fly and maintain and support classified aviation programs are protecting the country in ways the country will never fully know. That deserves acknowledgement even when the details cannot be spoken aloud. Let us now address the B-21 more directly, because in talking about what might exist beyond it, there is a risk of underselling what it actually represents. The B-21 Raider is not a consolation prize. It is not the public face put on an inferior program to satisfy a public that cannot be trusted with the real thing. It is a genuinely revolutionary aircraft that will define American strategic bombing for decades. Its low observable characteristics represent a substantial advancement over the B-2 Spirit, incorporating design lessons learned from the F-22 Raptor and F-35 Lightning programs, as well as from ongoing research into radar cross-section reduction that has been funded continuously since the B-2 entered service. Its open systems architecture, the design philosophy that allows its sensors, communications, and weapons to be updated through software rather than requiring physical replacement, means that the B-21 is designed to grow with the threat rather than become obsolete when the threat evolves. It is a bomber that was designed to be relevant in 2050 and 2060, not just in 2025. The Air Force's plan to replace the entire B-1 and B-2 fleet with B-21s reflects a genuine strategic vision for the future of American air power, not a placeholder until something better arrives. And yet the history of American military aviation is very consistent on one point. The revolutionary aircraft that the public celebrates is rarely the most revolutionary aircraft in the hangar. It is the most revolutionary aircraft in the public hangar, and the public hangar is not the only hangar. There is something that serves as perhaps the most telling single data point in this entire discussion. It involves what the United States Air Force has said, and more importantly what it has not said, about the future of strategic aviation planning beyond the B-21. Defense planning documents, including the Air Force's own published strategic visions and the congressionally mandated reports on future force structure, consistently address the B-21 as the next-generation bomber. They describe its capabilities in the future tense, as if it represents the current limit of what is being pursued. But those same documents contain references to studies, to concept development efforts, to advanced technology demonstrations that by any reasonable reading suggest ongoing work beyond what the B-21 represents. The language used in these references is careful and bounded in exactly the same way that the language used by senior officers at the B-21 rollout was careful and bounded. There is always a qualifier. There is always a phrase that acknowledges a classified realm without describing it. There is always a note that certain capabilities are being pursued in forums that cannot be described in this document. For someone trained to read defense planning documents, those notes are not boilerplate. They are breadcrumbs. The most significant of those breadcrumbs, the one that defense analysts have returned to repeatedly, is a series of references in various Air Force planning documents to a capability described as penetrating strike in a denied environment against an advanced integrated air defense system with minimal dependence on electronic attack support. That description matters enormously. The B-21 is designed to survive in a denied environment with support from electronic attack aircraft and other enablers. It is a powerful capability, but it is part of a broader system. The capability being referenced in classified planning documents appears to describe something that does not require those enablers. Something that achieves penetration not by suppressing enemy defenses, but by being genuinely invisible to them, or by moving through them too quickly to be effectively engaged. That is a fundamentally different level of capability, and the fact that it appears in planning documents as a requirement being pursued, not a capability already delivered by the B-21, suggests that whatever represents it either already exists in classified form or is in advanced development aimed at achieving operational status in the near future. Now let us talk about hypersonics specifically, because it is impossible to have this conversation seriously without addressing what hypersonic technology means for the future of penetrating strike. A hypersonic aircraft, broadly defined as one capable of sustained flight at Mach 5 or above, presents air defense systems with a problem that is categorically different from what they are designed to handle. At Mach 5, an aircraft covers roughly 1 mile per second. At Mach 10, it covers 2 miles per second. The detection, tracking, targeting, and intercept timeline that air defense systems are designed around assumes targets moving at speeds consistent with current combat aircraft. Even the fastest combat aircraft top out at around Mach 3, and they cannot sustain that speed for extended periods. A platform that sustains Mach 5 or higher over the duration of a strike mission compresses every step of the air defense response timeline to the point of potential impossibility. You cannot intercept a missile or aircraft that you detect 10 seconds before it arrives over its target. The United States has been developing hypersonic technology for decades. The X-51 Waverider demonstrator flew in 2013 and achieved sustained Mach 5 flight. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency has funded multiple hypersonic programs. The Air Force Research Laboratory has been working on scramjet propulsion, the engine technology that enables sustained hypersonic flight, continuously since the 1990s. The technologies required for a manned or unmanned hypersonic strike platform are not fictional. They have been demonstrated. The question is not whether they are technically feasible. The question is whether the Air Force has invested the classified resources necessary to turn demonstrated technology into an operational capability. Based on the budget indicators that have been discussed, the honest answer is that it would be more surprising if they had not. What does an operational hypersonic or high supersonic stealth strike platform actually look like? Obviously, the details of any classified program are unavailable, but physics and engineering constrain the design space enough that reasonable inferences are possible. Such an aircraft would almost certainly be very different from the B-21 in its external appearance. The flying wing configuration that makes the B-21 and B-2 so effective at low-speed stealth is not optimal for high supersonic or hypersonic flight. At those speeds, aerodynamic heating becomes a dominant design driver, and the thermal management requirements push toward different shapes, sharper leading edges, different materials choices. The aircraft would likely be smaller than the B-21 in terms of its cross-sectional area, though not necessarily in terms of its overall length. It would carry fewer weapons, not because the requirement for payload is smaller, but because the physics of high-speed flight and the heating environment fundamentally limit what can be carried externally or in large internal bays. It would rely on a class of weapons, probably hypersonic standoff weapons, that are currently in development under acknowledged programs, to deliver effects over a wider area than its own body can directly attack. The pilot or the autonomous control system would face a flight environment far more demanding than anything currently encountered in operational aviation, with G-loads, heating rates, and control system challenges that represent genuine engineering frontiers. The maintenance and sustainment of such an aircraft would be extraordinarily complex. The B-2's maintenance requirements are already substantially more demanding than conventional aircraft because of the care required to maintain its low observable coatings and its sensitive systems. A platform operating in the hypersonic regime would face thermal degradation of its structural and coating materials, requiring inspection and potential replacement after every high-speed mission. The number of aircraft that could be maintained in operational status at any given time would likely be small. This is not a platform for mass deployment. It is a platform for the most demanding, highest priority missions against the most heavily defended targets. It is the tip of the spear, not the blade. And that brings us to the operational concept that makes the most sense given everything we know or can reasonably infer. The relationship between the B-21 and whatever lies beyond it is not one of replacement, but of complementarity. The